Anyway, as I started to say before, really appreciate the opportunity to participate tonight. And now I have to also thank you for your patience as I work through a few technical glitches. Sabrina was mentioning that, it's really going to be a high level presentation tonight, and it's really to give a feel for who Acadia Pharmaceuticals is as a company, to talk about Acadia Canada and our approach to really be able to make it an optimal experience for the Rett community as we start to set up in Canada. So obviously the intro has been done, so there's not as much to say here. The only thing I would say is that in the last few weeks, Acadia announced that they're going global with treatment for Rett syndrome. And Canada is the first country after the US. So these are really exciting times. I mean, it's exciting times for me, to be involved with this organization. It's exciting times for the Rett community here in Canada. And it's an exciting time for, Acadia as it continues to expand and potentially be able to bring a treatment option available to Rett communities around the globe. So it's all very exciting, and I'm 5 weeks in. So I'm very much into listening and learning phase. And as part of that is really getting a better understanding, such as, the event tonight, to really hear from the Rett community, from patients, from caregivers, from healthcare professionals, anything that would really help be able to inform how best to develop systems, programs, and also the team that I'll be building in Canada. So as I say, it's an exciting time and it's a building time. So what I'm going to do is take you through sort of an approach of Acadia in the sense of how it came to be, and then talk a little bit more about the commitment with Rett, and then end sort of with the commitment on the rare disease portfolio beyond Rett. And then I'll get to talking a little bit more specifically for Canada. So what I don't know if you can see, because I see a panel of names, but on the side of this slide, we have our purpose, we have our mission, we have some of our values. And what I found really interesting is that the mission is that we elevate life. And when I was going through the interview process at Acadia, I had a chance to speak with Steve Davis, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Acadia. And when he talked about elevate life, it really hit home for me, because he was saying that, not every product can be transformational. Not every product is going to be a cure, but it doesn't mean that as a company, we shouldn't invest, time and money and people in products that actually can elevate the life experience. So, it talks about brighter moments shining through for patients and their loved ones. And it's the idea that if there's some ability to get some quality of life back, if there's some opportunity to be able to restore and bring the person back to where they were, and have a greater connection with family, then that's our mission, to elevate life. So with that, Acadia, back 30 years ago in 1993, was called Receptor Technologies. And then through sort of the morphosis that companies go through, they rebranded as Acadia. And then they shifted the focus to look at some small molecule research. And it actually led to the synthesization of pimavanserin. So this is really sort of the history of what allowed Acadia to be what Acadia is today. They, in the early 2000s, entered into human studies in patients with Parkinson's disease psychosis. So that led to, in 2016, in the US, Nuplazid being approved and being the first treatment for hallucinations and delusions associated with Parkinson's disease. That, I think, also allowed for a growth phase in Acadia. And it allowed them to sort of diverse the portfolio a little further with respect to opportunities for schizophrenia, negative symptoms of schizophrenia, as well as Alzheimer's disease psychosis. And it allowed them to be able to look at a business development strategy, specifically in rare and specifically in the central nervous system. And in 2018, there was an exclusive licensing agreement to develop and commercialize trofinetide for the treatment of Rett syndrome. And this was really driven by the mission to elevate life and to understand that Rett is a rare disease therapeutic area with a high unmet need. And I know you all know this, but it was trofinetide, the brand name debut, was approved in the US in March of this year, and it was launched in April of this year. So in addition to the opportunity in the US, we've also been able to expand that licensing agreement so that it's global, as I mentioned. And there's also, with this relationship with the company Neuron Pharmaceuticals, where this agreement came from, there's also an opportunity for global rights for another product, which is very much in the investigational stages. But if it would potentially have opportunity for Rett syndrome as well as Fragile X. The other thing with respect to the Rett sort of commitment would be a collaboration with Stoke Therapeutics that Acadia is involved in. And that's an RNA-based medicine for how Acadia came to be, that they are in Rett and that the commitment is to Rett. And then I'll just give a couple more highlights on the sort of corporate Acadia. I like this slide because it shows you we're not a multi-billion dollar company. We don't have necessarily deep pockets. We have 500 employees, and that is growing. I mean, since I joined 5 weeks ago, I know there's been more people joining, so it is a growth time at Acadia. The headquarters are in San Diego. There's also an active group in Princeton, and then the rest of us are remote, usually with Zoom working a little bit better than perhaps this evening. But what I like about this is it shows that we're a small, maybe medium-sized company, and that really allows us to stay connected. So I think part of the success and what I would call the charm, and what attracted me to Acadia, is the fact that we're still small enough that we can really work with the community. We can work with healthcare professionals. We can work with organizations like yourselves, and we can stay close, particularly in the rare disease space. So I've gone through a lot of this with respect to how we started, with Rett syndrome. The one thing I might just mention is another commitment in the neurological condition for Prader-Willi. So there is something in phase 3. So it's not yet through approvals, but it would still allow us to stay in this space, but also then be able to expand to potentially meet a symptom which is called hyperphagia, which basically is the patient sort of feeling constant starvation. So definitely overeating. And it's one of the most life-threatening symptoms to Prader-Willi. So that's a future opportunity, but again, showing Acadia's commitment to the neurodevelopmental space, in addition to our overall commitment for Rett. So Sabrina mentioned to me when we were talking about this presentation today, and knowing that, because of where we are with in Canada and what Health Canada allows and doesn't allow for speaking to the public on products that aren't approved. She did say that many of you heard in a press announcement that trofinetide would be available in Canada in 18 months. And I'm sure you're all asking, well, why 18 months? Why would it take this long? Why can't it be sooner? So I wanted to do is just sort of share a slide that gives you a sense of the layers and the players that are involved in Canada for us to be able to get a product to you into the patient community. So what you can see from this slide is the total sort of period with 18 months. So there's what's called a pre-submission phase, and that's really where we have to think about, there was a filing done in the US, what's required for us to be able to make that feasible in Canada. So there's different formatting, there's different modules. Health Canada, requires a lot of unique information for their filing, and that all has to be collected. It has to be formatted. Some of it has to be created before there's even an opportunity to make that submission to Health Canada. And the submission is called an NDS, or a new drug submission. And when that gets submitted to Health Canada for products, it is then a 360-day review, typically, for a product. That allows them to take the first 2 weeks to make sure that the submission is complete. And then it allows them the time to be able to break out the modules and be able to do the review on it. There is definitely communication with us as a manufacturer during that time, but it's at the end of that review that we, if it demonstrates safety and efficacy, that we then receive the NOC, which is the Notice of Compliance, which is our license to say we've proven it's safe, it's efficacious, we can now market it, which it's ultimately then when you think it would be available for you as a patient community to be able to access the product. But in addition to that layer, there's also a lot of payers in Canada, in the sense of steps and process that's involved in order to be able to get the product reimbursed. So at a national level, we have CADITH, which is sort of a pan-Canadian review, and then ENIS for Quebec. And so what they ask for is some truncated version of showing the safety and efficacy that Health Canada used to grant. And then we have to provide, it's referred to as pharmacoeconomics, so sort of cost effectiveness, justification for the value that this product has. That goes through a review. And actually, during that time of the review, there is an opportunity for the patient organization to be able to input. So there's considerations there for how we might be able to connect, and also with CORD as a national organization. When we meet the need and they say, yes, it's safe and efficacious, which of course we heard from Health Canada, but they confirm it's safe and efficacious. They also then say, and cost effective. And then they recommend for reimbursement. Once they recommend for reimbursement, then we move to what's called the PCPA, which is the Pan-Canadian Pricing Alliance. And that's a group where we have to then negotiate price. So that after the review by CADITH and their recommendation, we are then invited to negotiate with the PCPA. And then once we've had successful negotiations with the PCPA, we then have to enter into what's called a PLA, which is a provincial listing agreement. So there's a lot of steps that have to sort of happen in order to be able to get to the point where the product's available. And there's a lot of resources that also need to, be able to support that. There's also, private insurers like Sun Life or Desjardins, or, different insurance that many of you might have, that we will also then be sending in information. They ask for it in a different format than CADITH. And there's usually an opportunity to be able to get decisions for reimbursement much sooner than there is through the CADITH and the PCPA. So while that's all happening up at sort of that regulatory level, in addition, what we want to be able to do is sort of on that bottom line is really be able to connect with the community like we're doing today, and make this sort of a kickstart for just really getting a feel for what are the issues, what are the challenges, where are their gaps, and that includes also talking with healthcare professionals and maybe meeting at the RET clinics and just really understanding that. Then we need to sort of think, okay, so what's unique to Canada that we might want to do, we might want to build? And then from that, think of the programs. So for an example, and you may have heard about Care Connect, which is in the United States, and it helps support, patients and access, and, even working through some of the reimbursement myriad. And there might be, we might look at bringing something like that to Canada, but only after we've truly assessed and we've determined that, yes, that might be a good opportunity. And then there's other programs like that we would need to really be able to think about, coordinate and build. And then ultimately it gets to that access to the new therapy. So hopefully that gives you a sense of why 18 months. And hopefully it also gives you a sense of just sort of what's ahead for Acadia, for me in Canada, and hopefully partnering with you, Sabrina, and the team at ORSA to really be able to set us up for success, as I say. And I think at the very beginning, I made reference to optimal experience for the community, and optimal means in all these different parts and layers and players and timelines that we're doing it in the most efficient way, and that ultimately we're able to have the access and the best programs and supports for the Rett community. So
Pam, Pam, can we just ask a question, or do you want them at the end?
Yeah, no, it's up to you. I was under the impression we were putting the questions in writing at the end, but by all means, if it's something I can answer now.
We can do it all at the end.
Okay, all right. So I'm pretty close to the end. So anyway, as our commitment to Canada, what we want to really be able to do is, as I say, work with the community. We want to really be able to understand what the needs are for patients, caregivers, healthcare providers, everyone that's sort of going to touch with that Rett syndrome community. We want to be able to leverage the fact that we've got more than 5 years of successful engagement of the Rett community in the US, and figure out what works in Canada, what we might need to adapt for Canada. We also need to consider that, I mean, I'm talking with you at ORSA, but it might be a different issue for someone living in British Columbia, different issue for someone living in Alberta, maybe some different considerations in Quebec. So we want to honor the fact that there's that diversity as we think about Canada and how we're going to set up the best programs for best success. And then I guess really it's continuing with the potential for other product opportunities in the Rett space. And, you know, closing, I guess, a little bit with what was the mission, which is to elevate the lives of patients and caregivers for people living with Rett syndrome. So with that, I do want to just close with a kind of a neat slide. And I really hope, given that my internet didn't cooperate before, I don't blow the circuits with this last slide because it has some animation. But it's actually based on a patient. Her name was Emily, and she was an eye gaze artist. And she was able to create what you'll see is this artwork, as well as some other artworks using her Toby tool. This piece, when it's completed, you'll see it is called Confetti. And what's really nice is that the picture that she made is going to be hung in the headquarters in San Diego very shortly, actually. Emily was an extraordinary young woman. Unfortunately, she passed away just days before DAYBUE was approved in the United States. She was older than the parameters allowed in the clinical trial, which was unfortunate. But at the same time, she lived a full life. She enjoyed music. She did wheelchair dancing. She was artistic, as you'll see. She was a silent partner in a business. She was an ice skater and a patient educator. And like all things, she was more than her disease. And that's really the case in most times. So I'm going to close with this. And then, of course, we'll flip to questions. And I always find this so moving because, you know, Emily lives on, and it's just, it reminds us that that there's so much in every one of us. And I know, you know, for the Rett community, that's always that's always, I'm sure for you, a daily reminder as you're working potentially with your child or with another loved one. And with that, I would say thank you again for the opportunity. We are really excited as Acadia to be in the Rett community space, and I'm really excited to be able to be here in Canada to set this up. with that, I guess we'll turn it to questions.
Okay, we've got a question here. If you're not able to answer, just let us know. But is there a possibility that Canada's Drug and Health Technology Agency will say this is not financially viable?
So there's a whole process that CADIT goes through. So there is that potential. I would hope that as a result of everything we're going to be doing, to have communications, to be able to meet all their needs, and knowing that it's being reimbursed in the states already, that we'll put everything possible to ensure that they come up with a recommendation for reimbursement, but nothing's 100%.
If there's any more questions, please put them in the chat.
I guess while we're waiting for any questions, I'd just like to thank you, Pam. Like, that was a wonderful presentation, and also the ending here with Emily's artwork. It's very touching and very inspiring. As a parent with a child with Rett syndrome, we're always trying to do the best for our child and provide the best quality of life, but also looking at these legacy pieces that will continue as she paves the way for other people in the future. So this is really touching, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
I have another question that's come through. Is there a web link to find out more about the studies on the effects of the drug as found in the US?
So I'm not sure who asked that question, if it's a healthcare professional or if it's a patient. I mean, Health Canada is very specific with their rules on what we can do as a manufacturer to communicate any sort of clinical scientific information that would look like it's promotional before there's an approval in Canada. So there won't really be that information. A healthcare professional might be able to get in on the link in the US and be able to get some different information, but it's not publicly available as a manufacturer for us to have that information accessible. And we don't actually have a Canadian website yet. That's one of those programs that we need to think about, and systems we need to think about building out. Any other questions?
I don't see any questions coming through right now, Pam. But we can always flip back. If anybody does put anything in the chat, we can always ask you. Or you can also email ORSA at info@ret.ca. If you have any questions or thinking of anything after this presentation, we'll be happy to try to direct it to the right person to have your question answered.
Thank you. And thanks again. I apologize. I don't know what happened with the internet, but I'm certainly glad that when we finally started the presentation, it decided to cooperate. And thanks again for this opportunity. Now,
Thanks,
I need to give you